When my newly bought copy of Gremlins 2, the new batch for Game Boy, arrived in the post, my memories of the franchise were hazy at best. The weird and wonderful creature features had certainly captured my attention as a child, but I hadn't paid any mind to them in the preceding decades. When my 4-year-old daughter showed an interest in the game, I was immediately put in mind of the soft, fluffy gizmo toy I used to sleep with at her age. I quickly brought up YouTube and searched for a random scene. "You'll love this," I naively declared. Cue a scene where a terrified woman slowly walks through her house, kitchen knife in hand. She finds the not at all cute and fluffy versions of the titular creatures causing mischief and mayhem. She then proceeds to murder them all in various gruesome ways. One is stabbed repeatedly, another is shoved headfirst into a blender, and another is microwaved to death. I'd given the scene a brief period of benefit of the doubt before slowly turning the iPad away from the innocent gaze of my daughter. I could have sworn this was a kids' film, I sheepishly thought whilst hoping my wife hadn't noticed. It was a different time back then, I concluded, and turned my attention back to my new game. Gremlins 2, the new batch, had released for the Game Boy in 1990 to coincide with the sequel film it was based on. Incidentally, and despite its numerical title, Gremlins 2 is actually the first and only Gremlins game on the system, although in 2001 a game based on the first film was released for the Game Boy Color. Developed by Sunsoft, the Game Boy entry is entirely different from its NES counterpart, which released at the same time. That game was played from an overhead perspective, whereas the Game Boy version is played as a 2D side-scrolling platformer. The game is fairly compact, even by Game Boy standards, taking place over just 4 stages, each of which culminates in a boss fight. In fact, the entire game can be beaten in as little as 15 minutes. Child's play, right? Well, let's find out. The first thing you'll notice when booting up the game is how nice it looks for a Game Boy title. Gizmo's sprite is large and detailed, as are the many enemies he'll encounter. There's also nice detail in the backgrounds too, and it's used sparsely so as to keep the action clear. Everything animates and moves smoothly too. It all adds to a game that's very easy on the eye. The first stage is designed very much like a hands-on tutorial. We're introduced to every item and hazard one by one so that we can learn about them. Gizmo is defenceless until he can find a pencil, which he uses to attack enemies, albeit with a range of, well, a pencil. Radios give him a one-use projectile attack in the form of a musical note. Toolboxes give Gizmo invulnerability against enemies and can withstand 5 hits before breaking. Blocks denoted with a boxing glove fire out punches on either side when jumped on. All of these are useful for taking out the various enemies that inhabit the game, each of which takes at least 2 hits to kill with the pencil. Between the short range and the multiple hits required, and the short period of invincibility they have after each hit, every enemy encounter can easily result in Gizmo taking damage. Thankfully, small hearts can be found to refill one of Gizmo's 4 health, and large ones can restore him fully. These are dotted strategically around each stage, but are far from generous. This is a game of care and patience, as a lack of focus can quickly lead to losing a life. Speaking of lives, the game gives you 3 per continue. There are no checkpoints in the stage, and so losing one will start you right back at the beginning. Thankfully, there are infinite continues if, or rather when, you run out of lives, which also start you from the beginning of the current stage. In fact, the only real purpose of the lives is to allow you multiple attempts at the game's bosses. This is something you'll need to make the most of though, as a few of them are tricky to say the least. The first boss encounter is against a rock-throwing gremlin. Not only do the rocks come in thick and fast, but the cheeky gremlin also bounces around unhelpfully, making it tough to get within pencil-swinging range. With a patient approach it's not too bad, however. Once he's dealt with, the game starts proper. Enter Stage 2. Here we start to see the true difficulty in the game. Hazards. These come in the form of spikes, conveyor belts that lead to spikes, spring jumps over spikes, spring jumps under spikes, fake blocks that drop you onto, well, spikes, and the odd bottomless pit. And did I mention spikes? One thing you'll quickly have to learn is the nuance of the jump button. The game has a remarkably sensitive jump, whereby the length of time you hold the button will determine the exact height, but of course all within half a second. It's an aspect of the game that demands absolute mastery. Spikes are constantly placed above platforming sections, eagerly awaiting to punish the clumsy thumb press. You want that small heart? Have fun jumping over the alternating conveyor belts under a low ceiling of spikes. We also get a hint of something that comes up more later, springs placed directly below platforms. Not only do you have to contend with the awkward timing of the spring, but also navigating in mid-air around the platform. It's an absolute bugger, and something that took me a long time to get even close to comfortable with. Certain sections like this still fill me with dread and anxiety, but we'll get onto those soon enough. Stage 2 ends with a boss fight against a bat-like gremlin. Once again, the fast moving boss and the minuscule reach of the pencil make it tricky enough, but after each hit, a trio of almost impossible to avoid bats pop out. Even with a faultless approach, it still feels like a race to finish the boss before Gizmo's life is ebbed away. Stage 3 once again ramps up the difficulty. Have you mastered springs yet? Because we've got fecking loads of them here. After bouncing your way around for a while and fighting your way through a very annoying skateboarding enemy, you come to the single hardest jump in the game. A long gap with a block strategically placed over the middle. A full jump causes Gizmo to hit his head on the block and fall down the gap. Too small of a jump, however, will see him fail to reach the other side. You have to perform what can only be described as a 3/4 jump. Hold the button for a millisecond too long or a millisecond too short and you'll see Gizmo plummet, and then it's back to the beginning of the stage. With practice, however, the tricky jump can be mastered and performed fairly reliably. Sadly, what waits for you on the other side is arguably even more sadistic. A moving platform over a bottomless pit that requires a quick succession of jumps with perfect timing. It feels horrendously unfair when you first encounter it. Not only is it almost impossible to react to the rapidly approaching spikes, but you also have to ensure that you jump quickly enough to land back on the fast moving platform. And of course, each failure results in a trek back through the stage to try again. Once that's over, however, there's still a few more nasty surprises in store, but let's skip to the end. The stage 3 boss is an electric gremlin that zaps wildly across the screen. Gizmo needs to avoid damage whilst waiting for the gremlin to stop for a brief moment. With his tiny reach, Gizmo needs not only to avoid the zapping gremlin, but also to predict when and where he'll stop before getting a quick hit in. Then it's time to jump quickly out of the way as the boss then darts side to side a few times before zapping around again. It's not an easy fight, and the prospect of losing your lives and having to go through stage 3 again makes it horribly intense. Like everything else in the game, however, it is doable with practice, and then it's on to the final stage. This level takes everything that was hard about stage 3 and doubles the intensity. Awkward spring jumps surrounded by spikes greet you. I don't think any game has made me feel so nervous and uneasy as the springs do here. It's so easy to panic and second guess yourself and dwindle away your health on the spikes. It's horrible. Once that's over, you're onto a conveyor belt platforming section, of course littered with spikes, enemies, tricky jumps and fake blocks. The level continues in this way until you reach the star attraction, the invisible maze. Here Gizmo is obscured from view, and the player must navigate through a series of platforms by guessing where he is at any given time. It's an absolute nightmare. So many times I thought I was making progress, only to see Gizmo pop out again from the entrance, now only with less health. Mercifully, after many failed attempts, I was informed of an easier solution. When Gizmo holds a radio, a music note appears above his head. More importantly, this music note remains visible through the walls that obscure Gizmo. Was this an intentional lifeline from the developer, or just an oversight? Who knows, but at this point I'm taking all the help I can get. After a few more tricky jumps, and a couple where damage from spikes feels inevitable, it's time to face the final boss. Suddenly, Gizmo is armed with a bow and arrow, and stands on a small platform in the corner, with a large spider-like gremlin taking up most of the screen. Cobwebs drop down, and Gizmo has little room to move out of the way. He can only attack horizontally, which falls well short of the boss's only weak point, his face. Gizmo has to jump into a larger cobweb, which moves up and down in a zigzag pattern. At this point it becomes impossible to dodge the falling webs, and so becomes a race to shoot the tiny hitbox of the boss several times before Gizmo's life runs out. If you didn't enter the boss fight with full health, then it's nigh on impossible. Damage is literally inevitable. If you don't have any spare lives, then have fun getting through stage 4 again. But should you manage it, the game is finally over and you can enjoy the short ending. Or more importantly, the satisfaction of having overcome an incredibly challenging video game. I feel so sorry for any child who was given this game back when it came out. Quite frankly, you never stood a chance. Yet for all my scaremongering, I do think Gremlins 2 is actually a pretty good game, though maybe that's just the Stockholm Syndrome talking. It may have been designed to be as difficult as possible, as many Game Boy games were, presumably to hide their lack of content, but in that way it is designed almost impeccably. Every bit of the game can be learnt and mastered. It's a cryptic puzzle that needs to be cracked one piece at a time. When you finally get a section down that felt impossible before, it's incredibly satisfying. If nothing else, the graphics are pleasant, the music is too, the controls are decent, and each stage has clearly been crafted with care. In that way, there's nothing actually wrong with Gremlins 2, it's just not for kids. Take care, and thanks for watching.